This lesson is a quick review on simplifying fractions and creating equivalent fractions. So yesterday we talked about simplifying fractions a bit, but I'm going to review it again and go over some common mistakes. We are going to practice these today so you're prepared for it when we start adding and subtracting fractions tomorrow. So when you're simplifying fractions, you always have to be asking yourself, what can I divide the numerator and denominator by? What are the common factors? You want the greatest common factor when you're simplifying. The greatest common factor for 3 and 15 is 3. The only number that they have in common is 3, so therefore it's the greatest common factor, and I can divide 3 and 15 both by 3 and reduce it to 1/5. Now this is in lowest terms. So when you're working with a number like 12/24, if you think about the factors of 12 and 24, the factors of 12 are 2, 4, and 3. Sorry, those are out of order. 2, 4, 3, and 12, and 6. The factors of 24 are, oh, and I forgot 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8. You can see there's a lot for this one, and 12. Did I miss any? Nope, that looks right. So when you're, oh, and 24. So when you're doing this, you want to be thinking about the common factors that you have. So I can divide both these by 2, but it's not the greatest common factor. If you just go with the fastest one, you're usually going to have to reduce it a couple of times. I could go with 4, but is that the greatest one? Nope. I could go with 3, also not the greatest one. I could go with 6, again, not the greatest one. What I'm looking for is this 12. The 12 is your greatest common factor. This is going to get it done with one shot. So I can divide 12 by 12 and 24 by 12 and reduce it to 1/2, and I'm done. If I went with 2, 4, 3, any of those other numbers, I would have to reduce several times to get it to simplest terms. So make sure you're using the greatest common factor so you're not doing a whole bunch of work. I always tell kids, if you have an even on the top and bottom and you don't know what to do, always divide by 2. If there's an even on the top and bottom and you don't know what to do, always divide by 2. You don't want to spend too long looking for those factors. If you're not really sure and they're both even, cut them in half. And then when you see this, I can cut it in half again. And I can see I can divide by 5 now. So sometimes when you start making them smaller, it's easier to see what their common factor is. So there's nothing wrong with doing this. It just takes longer and uses more paper. The other thing we need to talk about are creating equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are when you multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. So if I multiply this by 4, 1 times 4 is 4, and 2 times 4 is 8, I can create an equivalent fraction. I could also multiply 4/8 by 2 and get 8/16, also an equivalent fraction. So when you're doing equivalent fractions, you need to make sure you're multiplying the numerator and denominator by the same number. Now, why do we do equivalent fractions? Well, that is going to be what will we will do all throughout this next week with adding and subtraction. So sometimes you're going to have two numbers we're adding together that are going to have different denominators. So for example, if I want to add 3/4 and 2/3, I can't do anything with these two numbers and add them together unless the denominators are the same, which they are not. So when we're creating equivalent fractions for adding and subtracting, you want to find the least common denominator. The least common denominator, something I will write LCD for after this because that's really long to write. Your least common denominator is the smallest number you can convert these into and have them be the same. So I know that 3 and 4 can both be converted into 12ths. So your least common denominator for 3/4 and 2/3 are going to be 12ths. I know that 4 times 3 is 12, so now I will multiply the numerator by 3 to create 9/12. 3 times 4 is 12, so now I'm going to multiply 4 times 2 and get 8. So now I have two fractions that are the same size pieces. They're both 12ths. And starting tomorrow, we're going to be adding these together. If I'm looking for the least common denominator for, let's say, 1/3 and 5/6. Well, I know that 3 times 2 is 6. So 6 is going to be my least common denominator. Sometimes you get lucky and you only have to change 1. So for this one, 3 times 2 equals 6, and 1 times 2 equals 2. So now I have two fractions that are both in 6, so then I can go on and do other things with them. Hope that helps.